November 20th, 1943, the middle of the Pacific Ocean. For thousands of young American Marines, this was supposed to be the day they'd prove their mettle. The target was a tiny coral-fringed atoll called Tarawa. Planners said it would be over in 3 days, maybe less. They were wrong. As dawn broke, the Higgins boats, the Amtraks, lurched toward the shore. But something was immediately, terribly wrong. The tide. It was lower than predicted. The landing craft, heavy with men and equipment, scraped and ground to a halt on the hidden coral reef, hundreds of yards from the beach. Hundreds of yards of open, shallow water. And on that beach, the Japanese were waiting. The ramps slammed down, and the world exploded. Machine gun fire ripped across the turquoise water, turning it red. Mortar shells rained down, sending geysers of water and shrapnel into the air. Men who had been joking just moments before were cut down as they jumped into the chest-deep water. It wasn't a charge. It was a slaughter. They were sitting ducks, weighed down by nearly 100 pounds of gear, slogging through the water, trying to run, trying to find cover where there was none. The noise was deafening, a constant roar of engines, explosions, and the high-pitched crack of rifles, punctuated by the screams of the wounded and dying. This wasn't the glorious battle they had imagined. This was a meat grinder. For the Marines struggling to cross that deadly stretch of water, the only goal was to take one more step, to stay alive for one more second, and to somehow reach that sliver of sand. The battle for Betio, the main island of the Tarawa Atoll, was one of the bloodiest in Marine Corps history. The objective was a Japanese airfield that was critical to the American island-hopping campaign toward Japan. Taking it was non-negotiable. The Japanese defenders, elite naval infantry, knew this. They had spent months fortifying the tiny island, turning it into a fortress of pillboxes, bunkers, and gun emplacements, all connected by a network of tunnels. Their commander, Admiral Shibasaki, had boasted that 1 million men couldn't take Tarawa in 100 years. The Americans were about to try with just 18,000. Those who survived the horrific wade to the beach found no relief. They were pinned down behind a low seawall made of coconut logs. Peeking over the top meant instant death from a sniper's bullet. The beach itself was a nightmare landscape. Bodies floated in the surf, washing ashore with the tide. Wounded men cried out for corpsmen who were themselves targets. The sand was littered with abandoned equipment, blasted vehicles, and the dead. The noise was relentless. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, diesel fumes, and death. There was no front line, no rear. The battle was everywhere, a chaotic, swirling mess of close-quarters combat. Marines huddled behind the seawall, trying to regroup, trying to make sense of the chaos. NCOs and officers, those who were still alive, screamed orders that were barely heard over the din. They had to get off the beach. Staying there was a death sentence. In small groups, they began to make their move, crawling, dashing from one crater to the next, trying to gain a foothold on the island. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood. They faced machine gun nests that seemed impossible to silence. A Marine would throw a grenade, and another would follow up with a burst from his Thompson submachine gun. A flamethrower team would crawl forward, trying to get close enough to roast the occupants of a pillbox, knowing they were the #1 target for every Japanese rifleman. The first day was a disaster. By nightfall, the Marines held only a tiny, precarious beachhead. They were low on ammunition, water, and medical supplies. Thousands were dead or wounded. The situation was so desperate that the American commander, General Holland "Howlin' Mad" Smith, considered abandoning the assault. But on the island, the Marines were not giving up. They were digging in, holding on, and preparing to push forward. Night brought no rest. The darkness was illuminated by the constant flash of explosions and the eerie green glow of flares. Japanese soldiers would launch infiltration attacks, crawling through the darkness to throw grenades into Marine foxholes. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle, every shadow, could be an enemy. The second day dawned with the Marines still clinging to their sliver of hell. But now, reinforcements and supplies were beginning to reach the shore. The tide had finally risen, allowing some landing craft to get closer. Tanks were brought ashore, and their cannons began to systematically blast away at the Japanese bunkers, that had been so resistant to naval and air bombardment. The battle shifted from a desperate struggle for survival to a brutal, methodical grind. The Marines pushed inland, fighting yard by yard, bunker by bunker. The combat was intimate and savage. They used flamethrowers, demolition charges, and grenades to clear the Japanese positions. Often, it came down to bayonets and knives in the dark, suffocating confines of a bunker. The Japanese defenders fought with incredible tenacity. They refused to surrender. When their positions were overrun, they would often launch suicidal banzai charges, running directly into American machine guns. Wounded Japanese soldiers would hide grenades, waiting for a corpsman to approach before detonating them. For the Marines, this meant there was no quarter given or asked. It was a fight to the absolute finish. The psychological toll was immense. Seeing such fanaticism, such a willingness to die, was deeply unsettling. The Marines learned to be ruthless because any hesitation could be fatal. By the third day, the tide of the battle had turned. The organized Japanese resistance was beginning to crumble. The Marines, now with overwhelming firepower and numbers on the island, pushed across the airfield, the prize they had come for. They advanced through the devastated landscape, a wasteland of shattered palm trees and smoldering wreckage. The last pockets of resistance were cornered and eliminated. The fighting was still vicious, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. At the eastern tip of the island, the remaining Japanese defenders launched a final massive banzai charge. Hundreds of soldiers, armed with little more than swords and bayonets, charged the American lines. They were met with a wall of fire and annihilated. After 76 brutal hours, the island was declared secure. But the cost was staggering. In just over 3 days, the Marine Corps had suffered over 3,000 casualties, with nearly 1,000 killed. It was a casualty rate that shocked the American public. Almost the entire Japanese garrison of nearly 5,000 men was wiped out. Only a handful were taken prisoner, most of them Korean laborers. Tarawa became a name synonymous with sacrifice and brutal, bloody fighting. Looking back, the lessons learned at Tarawa were invaluable, though paid for at a terrible price. The failures of intelligence, the problems with the landing craft, the ineffectiveness of the initial bombardment, all of these led to major changes in how the U.S. military conducted amphibious assaults. Future landings at places like Normandy, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa would be different because of the sacrifices made on that tiny patch of sand in the Pacific. The bravery of the Marines who waded through that fire-swept water and clawed their way onto the beach became legendary. They faced the worst imaginable conditions and did not break. They fought and they won, securing a vital stepping stone on the long, bloody road to Tokyo. The Battle of Tarawa is a stark reminder of the true cost of war, the sheer horror of combat, and the incredible courage of the ordinary young men who are asked to fight it. Thank you for watching. If you found this look into history meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. See you next time.